Thanks, Tricia. So first, I just want to say that this is not wine. So if I become incomprehensible, it has nothing to do with this. So I wanted to start by asking you guys, like, what kind of drew you into leadership and the politics of it all? Like, for me, it was, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I was 5 years old. My mom walked in to find me watching the Meech Lake Accord, of all things, right? And then, time goes on and on and on. And, I got drawn in. And once you're in, you don't get out. It's like the mob around here. But so what pulled you guys in?
I was born on Labor Day.
Oh.
I find that very interesting. And when I was 16, I worked in a hot dog stand in a mall. And they asked me to come in on a day that I didn't work. And I called the labor board. And I said, why is it that they're asking me to come in and I'm not going to get paid? And they said, Heidi, you are going to be able to get paid for 3 hours minimum. So I called my employer and I said, I called the labor board. I was 16. And they told me I get 3 hours of pay. And they said, okay, that's fine, but don't tell anybody else. So that's how it started for me.
Okay.
Well, I was actually told I was too quiet, actually, in the 6th grade. Parents got a report card that says, Karen needs to speak up more. And now I speak up for a lot of our members. But I came from a household of unionists. My mom was the president of our OPSU local, so she was the president and treasurer. My dad was an auto worker, so he worked at Ford. He was a uniform member for 30 years. Retired. He just recently passed away, so I'm just a little emotional, but that was sort of, I saw the benefits of being part of a union and the collective strength, and just being in a household that kind of shared that value. So for me, when I got my first teaching career, and it was only at that time the social contract, and they hired 15 teachers, and it was at a little dinner, and they said, hey, we want you to get involved with your federation at that time, and I did. So it was a natural for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not quite like Heidi, but I was born on World Teachers Day. But I feel like I kind of stumbled into leadership. It wasn't something that I sought out to get, but I came into the teaching role. Having gone through university in Alberta, I had learned a bit about Alberta Teachers Association. And then when I came into Saskatchewan, I had no idea about the STF, and put my hand up to be the SSL, and then I put my hand up to be the counselor, and then I put my hand up to be on the executive, and it just snowballed.
It's kind of like
That's how it happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was at my first school in Montreal, so I taught in Montreal, and somebody came up and says, you want to be the delegate? And I'm like, what does that mean? And they said, all you do is stuff the boxes.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, I can do that. But when I went to those delegate meetings, I was like, this is fascinating to learn about, we call it the Bible. We have a huge collective agreement in Quebec. And to learn about what the employer can and cannot do was fascinating for me. And I would just sit there in the delegates meeting and listen. And I think it was about learning, about the rules. Like these are the rules, and don't break them. So for me, it was, and then it just, like you said, snowballed into other things. Yeah.
Well, I've got a background in political science, and so for me, I looked at our link agreement, and I thought, oh, you could drive a semi through some of the loopholes. And so I was complaining, and then I realized, in my family, we have this rule that you can't complain if you don't vote. And I've actually called my grandmother on it. She called me and said, I've got to complain about the government. And I'm like, did you vote? No. Oh, bye. But so I'm like, well, I shouldn't be complaining about it if I'm not going to do anything about it. So I started small, and then it just kept on. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if any of you were at the Women's Symposium that was online a couple of years ago. There was Catherine Cochran that was speaking, and that is how she got into politics. She said her partner kept saying, will you stop complaining and do something about it? And she became Premier of Northwest Territories.
And I think that's empowering.
I mean, that's crazy.
It is, yeah.
And if you're not complaining, you're like me. I asked a lot of questions, right? I went to the meeting. I kept asking all these questions, and they're like, you know what, we'd like you to join our executive. You could probably be our communications person. Would you like to get involved? And that was it, attending a meeting. And me too, at that time, we were part of the Scarborough Women Teachers Federation, so it was only women. And then we amalgamated and we became two federations, became ETFO. So I saw a room of really amazing, powerful women leading in education and doing all those great things, and really wanted to be part of that. And someone just said, hey, yeah, they saw my inquisitive nature and thought I could be an asset to the executive. And I just said, sure, why not? Had no clue, no idea what that meant, but I knew I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be able to give back, and it was neat. I was in my early years of teaching, and they had lots of meetings and lots of food, so that was good, So there were a lot of good draws, and it was just really great to connect, I said, with like-minded women at that time.
Yeah. It's the people, at least for me, it's the people planting those little seeds, right? Like, you should do this, you should do this. You'd be really good in this position. You could do this. And that's what got me starting to think about it. I wouldn't say that it convinced me to do it. I definitely needed to get there on my own time as well. But it was a lot of people in my ear being like, put your name in, think about the executive, be a counselor, or just flat out nominating me for positions sometimes. But so maybe not quite getting there on my own time. So sometimes subtle nudges, sometimes pushing.
And now you're the one that's doing that to other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, so we were
Don't
probably
call me
all we were probably all tapped on the shoulder
Yes.
several times by other women who were also in positions of leadership, and that is what I do now all the time. I am doing the same thing. I'm tapping on their shoulders for sure. It's so important to uplift each other. Like, we need to support each other and uplift. We may not always agree, but we need to be there for each other.
When I was like just starting, I was like, oh, I can't do that. Like, I'd look at like the provincial executive or even our local and go, I can't do that. Like, there's no way. And then you realize that, you know what? Yeah, you can, right? But I mean, if you guys are anything like me, there was lots of things that were holding you back too, right? Like, do you have time? Or, like, I don't know what yours were, but I think most of us have those.
Yeah. I mean, and when I was starting, I was in my 6th year of teaching, so it was very young. But I said I was asking a lot of questions. I was engaged. I was on our local executive, and I said then we amalgamated, and there was an opportunity to be part of this new federation. And someone, they tapped me and said, Karen, there's an opening. Why don't you just put your name for election? And I'm thinking, this is not the capacity I was serving before was a non-release. This would be a released position. I didn't have any bargaining skills. I hadn't been in any major board meetings or anything like that, but someone saw something in me and thought that I could be able to do this job, and really pushed and tapped, and we'll work to help to get you elected. And I think that's important in regards to someone saying, I don't understand the system, but I think people see that you have a passion. I know I had a passion and I had a care for members. I wanted to advocate. I was really good at listening. And I think people see the skill set that you might not identify in yourself that are valuable to your members and valuable to the profession. And I really respected their opinions and that they were going to support me. And I jumped in, I put my name in, and I became vice president of the local, and I ran for president. I wasn't successful, and we'll talk about that because some of the failures really helped me to get where I am, and how I navigated those failures to get that support to run at provincial and say, hey, why not run for first vice president? You'll learn the budget, the $5 million budget. And then it was like, no, it's not 5, it's 60 million. Okay, I'll learn the budget. And then it's, why not run for president? Yeah, you can lead 83,000 people. You could do it. So it just sort of, it happens and you fall into it. And it's just, you question. But as we've heard here, it's a journey, and you step in at the points, and sometimes people push you in.
Yeah. And that's why we need to help each other, because I think women in general, and I don't like generalizing, but women do have a tendency to look at the list of requirements for a job and to check them all off. And if there's one thing on the list, oh, I don't know anything about that, like negotiating.
Negotiations, yeah.
Oh, I can't do this job. And that's wrong. It's totally wrong. I think teachers in a classroom, I mean, the fact that you are in a classroom with 30 kids and are able to lead them, it's leadership. That's what you're doing. So it's not that far away from what we're doing up here. It's the same idea. We're leading in a different way, but it's the same idea. And so I always say to teachers, you can do it. And I have to say, when I became president of my local union, then I started tapping a lot of women on the shoulders, and my executive became almost uniquely women. You know that 75 to 80% of teachers are women, and those are the people that should be sitting at the table. We should see 75 or 85% of the people around the table should be women. So it's really exciting. And women, when they see leaders that are women, they'll go, oh, she can do it. Maybe I can do it. So it's really important. Yeah.
Well, and that's the difficulty too, is when you're not seeing the women in the positions, it's hard to imagine how will this work for me. And that was one of my biggest struggles stepping into this role, is how is this going to work for me and my young family and not living in Saskatoon and all of the things that could have easily stopped me from putting my name in any one of them on their own. So sometimes you just have to do it and figure it out. You have someone behind you that's a pretzel that's making it all work.
Center, I will turn myself into a pretzel.
And I wanted to say, I mean, it's, you know, representation is so important, because when I stepped in and was leading at my local level, other women, other racialized women began to say, hey, I could see myself in that role. I could see myself part of the executive. So they got involved as stewards, or you call regional counselors. They began to sit on committees. And so we became more diversified, and there was more of an inclusion in having those conversations so people can see themselves. So it is really important to look at the intersectionality. You know, I'm a woman, but I'm also a Black woman. And so there are other barriers that I face, and we'll talk a little bit more, but people seeing that was something in regards to you know, being able to tap and to encourage other people, and the barriers, because I was also a mom at that time, and someone actually did say to me, you know, you should be home with your son, and I was like, and they did, and it was a struggle, because there's that guilt factor. Some people try to guilt you in, and you're trying to lead, but you know, I was a wonderful example for my son, and he's a great feminist, and it's just there's so much from what we can give as moms leading in that, and I think it's how do you remove those barriers, and how we talked about at our local, providing you know, on-site childcare or dependent care, doing things differently so that we could engage women in different stages of their career, right? In your early stages, you might want to be able to, but there are some barriers. In your mid-career teacher, you might have more time, and even, you know, a later career, it's just not over if you're in your last 5 to 10 years. We still need your wisdom. And I want to just go back to the negotiations thing, and then I'll let someone jump in. But I had those skills. You know, I was negotiating with those little grade 2 kids every single day. Put your coat on, sit over here with their parents and the principal. So I had those skills. I was reading documents, and so it was just really transferring those skills and people who supported me. And I had some wonderful men who actually supported me, who were part of our executive, who believed in being allies in that, and that's important as well.
Sam, how old are your children?
6 and 8.
That's amazing that you're sitting here today, because that was a barrier for me. I have 2 boys. They're now 19 and 22. But I didn't start this path until the oldest was 12. And I felt like, okay, now the oldest can take care of the youngest, and I'm okay. So that's amazing. And we need more flexibility, like you were saying. It's a huge problem. When we don't have the flexibility, then women don't step forward.
Karen, how many years ago was it when you were
told
you should be home with your son?
I say, oh my gosh, my son's 17. I say he was born on the picket line, because I was. And what's great is that we, you know, policies changed because I was a mom. We had no provisions in our Constitution in regards to maternity leave. So what was I going to do? Do I have to give up my vice presidency? And I did. I had to step back, and then I had to run an election during that, and then we were able to change the Constitution. So I didn't get a mat leave. I had 3 months, but we made sure that never happened to any other woman that was coming or anyone else in regards to any family situation. So you also have the ability to impact change. And at our first, I had them strapped into me at our annual meetings and speaking at the mic. And the following year, we have on-site childcare. And that was because women were saying, yeah, I want to be here. That's a barrier. And we had those conversations. So you can also be part of that change just because you're accepting where you are in your leadership journey. And Sam, that is so much great, because I'm sure there's other women who have young kids or who are saying, can I do this? And as being a young mom, I know other people saw that and said, okay, Karen's able to navigate that. There are some challenges. There were lots of challenges, but there was a lot of good things that came out of that. And I think each person has to weigh their circumstances. But I think we're in a time now where those barriers we need to remove them as much as possible.
I think we're in a spot too where, we discussed this a lot at our local, that a lot of teachers now, a lot of women are in that sandwich generation where not only are they caring for children, but they've also got aging parents they're caring for, and it gives you like a whole, you're being pulled in every direction, and then do I actually have time? Right? Do I actually have time to do this, right?
And that's why it's so important that you're at the table.
Exactly.
Because we provide that lens. And if we're not at the table, we don't provide that lens, nobody's going to think about it.
Right.
So if we're at the table and we provide that lens through being a mother or being a caregiver or whatever it is we do, then we create policy that's good for everybody.
That's right.
Not just children and women, but everybody, all of society.
Go ahead.
My thought just went to, and like you said, you had your son strapped to you.
I did at the microphone.
Like,
Yeah.
and I know I see
awesome.
the babies at council
Yeah.
now, and I just absolutely love it. Like, I felt like I needed to hide that away almost at sometimes, right? Like I had my mom here for support with me, but she stayed in the hotel room with my baby when I should have brought my kid down to the council floor, and it would have been perfectly fine. But for some reason in my head, I felt like this was some sort of deficit that I can't, like, that it would be perceived that I was less focused on the work that we were doing at council because I was distracted from a child, when that is not the case at all.
No.
But then also asking for those supports when they're needed, that maybe we should have childcare at these meetings when people need it, but where do you ask that question? How do you get that support? And it's overwhelming at times to try and think of those things. But that perception of what it looks like as a young mom, even now in this role, when I'm away or being pulled, and I stepped away from supper tonight to go take a call with my kids, and right, like, you're constantly pulled in both directions, but it doesn't mean you're any less focused on the work that you're doing. You're just multitasking a lot of the time.
Which I think women just inherently do all the time anyway. Like, really. We are multitaskers in general. And teachers are multitaskers, so.
But the perception of women is so different than the perception of men, those biases that we encounter constantly. I remember when I became my president of my local union, the first thing I did, and this is crazy, if you know me, I don't wear heels. I went out and bought heels because I thought I need to show them that I'm bigger and taller than any of them, And I kind of strutted in with my heels and realized that that was probably not the way it was going to happen. And I'm got flats on tonight, and I've had I did it for a month, and then I realized this ain't happening, so I got rid of my heels. But women are perceived as aggressive when they're trying to be powerful, and men are perceived as powerful when they're trying to be powerful, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So this is going to sound crazy, but I started acting more like a mother towards my male counterparts. How are your children? Oh, isn't that nice? And it actually worked. I was able to develop, and that's me personally, and I'm not saying that that's the way we should be, but we need to lead through the heart, I think, and that's what this is called, through the heart. But it's unfortunate that when I go in and say, listen, here's the way it is, tuck, 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 then they get angry with me and they think that I'm complaining, that I'm a bee with an itch.
Hey, they told me there was no swearing up here.
I didn't. I said a bee.
Bobby was very
and an
clear
itch.
about that. Okay, well, you know what? It was a good warning. It was a good warning.
Right.
But I find that awful. Like, you know, if my male counterpart came in and said this, and this, oh, he knows what he's talking about. So there's that a whole perception too.
Women are aggressive,
like
men
the
are
perception
assertive.
that you had about not having your child there, and I think it would have been great that you brought your child there. And we should be bringing our children to.
Being weak because you're a mother,
Well,
or
that's
being
terrible.
incompetent because you're young.
Yeah,
or, right?
exactly.
That you can't nurture and lead at the same time. It's not possible. But Heidi, I wanted to touch on what you talked about in regards to leadership and leadership styles, and feeling that you need to be tolerant and more powerful. And
Never felt that. Never felt I needed to be taller.
But it's, you know, I've encountered when you are strong, when you are focused, when you are determined, and you have a sense of direction. Sometimes people say, "Oh, why are you so angry? Or why are you so aggressive?" Well, no, I'm just being firm in what I'm saying, and I'm being persistent. And so it's perceived differently, and different leadership styles. When I found with our membership, they were accustomed to a male leadership style for a very long period of time. So it was almost conditioned to a way to respond. And so me coming in as a new leader, as a woman, you know, having much more of, I would say, I didn't feel the need to raise my voice in regards to how I was speaking. And so people thought maybe I wasn't as strong, or I wasn't as knowledgeable because I wasn't, you know, as loud. And so that quiet strength, it takes some time for that to, I found, for people to develop and to see that confidence. You have it, but if you're not, I mean, it can be tested. People were trying to test my level of leadership because my style was very different. So it wasn't what they were used to. And I think you know, another thing is being a woman and women in leadership. And I was talking to a few people. Angie, I was talking to Angie. Thanks, Angie. And we were just talking about, you know, when and I experienced this. I was talking to a group of leaders, and I was talking about a strategy that we were going to take and a direction we were going, and people seemed really. Some people were really gung-ho and great, and then a few were a little confused, and I'm thinking, okay, no, this is really good. I think this is a good way to go. And then we had another meeting a few weeks later because we wanted to give an opportunity for more clarity. And we had some other people who were kind of supporting the direction I was going in. And they didn't look like me, and it was, you know, we had a white male, middle-class man speak. And all of a sudden, people are nodding their head. Oh, yeah, great, great, great. And I'm thinking, I just said that. And I said that, nothing changed. The direction didn't change. It was almost sort of someone else who didn't look like me, who they felt was a leader, and affirmed that. And that's a reality. It's a reality that women face in regards to sometimes, and not all women, but I hear about it, but I actually experienced that. And I think also being a woman of color, right? There is sort of, you know, can we trust your direction? Not used to seeing that, not used to seeing me in those roles. Maybe I'm on a committee, or maybe you're a counselor or a steward, but you're actually leading me, yeah. And so those are things that, when I talk about the intersectionality, and I see some women of color in this room, you know, if you plan to engage, and some of our Indigenous women, right? Those are real barriers where people don't see you as leaders because they don't see you as here, and it's really having that confidence and having other women and other people say, you know, to support you in that. I had a really great executive team who were like, yeah, Karen, you got it, we got you. And they did, and we were able to move forward. But people actually saw that and came up to me after and sort of said, can't believe, you know, just that person said, oh, now we get it, because someone else had said it. And those are some of the, you know, in biases, whether that we develop because of our exposure towards leadership and who we think leaders are and what it means to lead, because that is a you know, an issue.
Absolutely. And allies, I mean,
Yes.
those are so important, to be surrounded by allies. You know, I don't know if you have allies or if you have people that have been pushing you. It's super important.
Well, and to get those women, like women of color, into those positions, those of us who aren't need to step back and make space too.
Absolutely.
Right, because if the space isn't there, it's not going to happen, right? And we have to make it comfortable. Like we have to make it an inclusive. We talked about inclusivity earlier today, right? We have to make not only our classrooms inclusive, but we need to make our organizations inclusive as well.
Yeah.
And that takes time. Everyone's
does.
at a different trajectory of leadership, of understanding around equity and those issues. My federation is at a different point, but I think it's important that you want to engage and be willing to, like I said, Rosemary Brown said, open those doors and then keep those doors open, because that's another thing you get here in leadership, and are you able to stay?
Yeah.
So do you find that the resistance is coming more from male colleagues or just in general? Like, what do you guys find, like in terms of leading men? Because in your positions, you're all leaders of your organizations, right? So how does that play out?
Samantha?
Sam, we're putting you on the spot here. Go.
I told you I was
She's looking at you. She's like,
listening.
okay, who's here right now?
I'm not gonna call out in the audience. No, I'm just kidding. I feel like I've had a lot of allies. I feel like I've had a lot of support from both men and women in the Federation, which has been really exciting. There have been instances where it's not overt, but there have been times where I've expressed struggle around the work and finding a balance, specifically when I was in the vice president role, because as we talked about, we don't have release time for our vice president, and it was a bargaining year, and I was balancing full-time teaching with bargaining on a bi-weekly basis, basically, and I said I was really struggling with how much I'm away, and I was told, well, you signed up for it.
Wow.
I guess I did, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut now and suck it up. So you try and reach out, and it wasn't, I know it wasn't like asking for support, but maybe just a little bit of comfort of like, yeah, I know this is hard. Like, I don't know what I can offer you, but not a, you signed up for it.
Yeah, I think it's really subtle. It's little subtle things. My executive, there are still more men on my executive than women, and some of them have been there for a very long time. And I get support from some of them, and some of them, it's just these little subtle things, you know, like I'm not, you know, at one point I might have said, oh, do you know that teachers are 75 to 80% women? And they're like, well, what about the male teachers? Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we should be representative around the table, but then they get very defensive about the fact that I brought that up, you know. So there's these little subtle things here and there, and it can be very, very frustrating. But, you know, I know I'm there for the right reasons. I'm there because I love my profession, and I want to protect my profession. And I know I can be a voice for teachers. So I know that I'm doing the right thing. You know, so, and some of the people around the table, I'm not sure if they're there for the right reasons, unfortunately. I'll just keep trucking through.
Yeah, keep pushing.
Yeah, well, I'd say I have a very supportive executive. I think the men on the executive are really wanting to support women in leadership, and I've had that support going through my journey. I think in some parts of our locals, there's still some challenges with that. I talked about, you know, testing my leadership. I felt some of the questionings on my decisions were very different. I've been on the executive team since 2009, so I've gone through a journey, been involved in the Federation for 30 years. So I didn't just start. So I've been able to see the different interactions with different presidents and the different the micro and you know aggressions that are there that are different. And you said it's very subtle, but it's very noticeable in regards to those decisions weren't questioned in regards to those memos or at those meetings. It hasn't been the same. It's sort of, you know, if someone said it, okay, sure, that was it. Karen's saying it, well, you know, we have, or if we change it, or there's a perception I've changed processes. I'm like,
Yes,
no,
that
this is the
happens to
same
me
process
too.
we've been doing for the last 24 years. And I had that come up recently. Oh, we've never done it this way before. Actually, we have. We haven't changed. And I actually had to say that. It is no different. So some of those sorts of things, sometimes it's easy. But you know, we like I said, our journey has been different, and allies have been important. Men have been important in regards to supporting. We have a designated position on our executive for women for vice presidents. We have designated positions for members of designated groups. We have women's only programs. We provide release time for women's programs so that there isn't that barrier. So it's during the workday. So we have certain things, and that doesn't happen just with women. We need people who can see the value, how everyone values, and how we're a better, a stronger, a greater federation. We're 80% women, and we need to have women at the helm of our federation. And I think that was definitely a driving force going forward for us and for me being where I am. We needed to have a woman, but we also needed to diversify that. And we had, at the time, a strong woman of color, a black woman, who could lead the organization. So there's all those layers of us coming up as an organization of 80% women, but are we including as many women as possible? Are we including Indigenous women, women with disabilities, LGBTQ women? Are we looking at a variety of those intersectionalities when we're talking about who are the women that are leading our organization? And like I said, we're at a different point, and that didn't happen overnight, right? It didn't happen overnight. And we came with a foundation of women, and 6% of our budget allocated to women's programs, because they said we merged as a federation. So we started on a different foundation, but it's also to challenge that foundation, because there were a lot of people who said, oh, we've arrived and you don't need to have special programs for women. We don't need to have Indigenous women leadership programs, you know. No, yeah, we do. We need to create those spaces so that they can have those authentic conversations, and helping to get them ways to get engaged and navigate in our organization at a staffing level. So, you know, diversifying our staff at the executive level, and just really at the leadership. So it took really some courageous conversations, right? Some difficult conversations. They weren't easy. Some very courageous conversations to get where we are. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because this is part of really sharing what it's like to be a woman in leadership. And that with that journey, it's not the same for everyone. And some women might have had a really easy time. Great, you didn't have those barriers, but you're the minority. Majority of us have had doors closed, have been told we're not ready, we're not qualified. And so those are some of the realities.
It's funny that Bobby and I were having supper this evening. We were talking about how, of course, I'm President-Designate for CTF, the Canadian Teachers Federation, and right now the board of directors, there's more women than I've ever seen, and I haven't been around for very long. And Bobby said to me, well, that changes constantly, so we can't just stop. We can't just say, oh, we're 75% women, it's done, we've made it, because it can change in a minute. Look what the pandemic did to women. It's a really good example. So when I was an art teacher at high school, and we had this project where kids had to make posters of what they were really passionate about. And one of the teams, it was all girls, they did this poster that said, we can't wait 185 years, which at the time, I think it was in 2012, believe it or not, was how many years it would take for women to be at gender equality at the rate that things were going. We have now moved from 185 to 267. So we can never stop fighting for our spot at the table. Even when there are women around the table, we need to continue fighting for women around the table. That's what Bobby and I were talking about at supper tonight.
When we were talking at the pensions board about how, we had a couple of openings, and how there was only one female applicant. Out of all the applicants, that was me. But
Good job.
I wanted my spot back. It's like, no, I want back on. And then the question came up, well, what do we need to do? How do we get women to apply for this? I said, well, in terms of that, we're looking at so many barriers in terms of women thinking they don't know enough to be part of that. I mean, $8 billion does sound pretty daunting, especially if you're the kind of person, like me, who checks their bank account before they go to the store, and that's financial management. But we've got people to do that. Don't worry. We have people who take care of the money side of things. It's all good. Don't worry, like, your pensions are fine. But I mean, so, you know, there's that, right? And women, I find, are more likely to go, I don't know if I can do it, therefore I can't. Whereas women are like, or men are like, maybe I can. Yep, I can do this, right? Like, it's just that confidence piece.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about that, and I said, well, it's also post-pandemic, and now we're back in the classrooms full-time without any of these restrictions. And so women were hit the hardest by the pandemic, and then you have them back in the classrooms where schools are just a disaster, right? So a lot of women were probably thinking, I can't do this right now. I don't have time for this. I can't do this. I can't take on one more thing because we're at the point of breaking. So it's like, for me, I was already doing it. It was part of my normal, right? But for others, adding something new.
Yeah.
So how do we get past that? What do we do?
We support each other. Like, you know, the pandemic was so difficult. It's unbelievable how many teachers, well, I'm from Quebec, so how many teachers decided to retire early, even with a penalty. They decided, I don't care, I'm leaving. How they felt undervalued. The government doesn't care about us. We're part of the risk. Like, in our province, it was always, it's a calculated risk. We're going back to school, it's a calculated risk. Well, that means that all these women were part of that calculated risk. Look at healthcare, same thing. Women are holding society up.
Yeah.
And we aren't treated with equal value as men. There's studies that show that when women take over a domain, salaries stagnate or they start to drop. And I know that, you know, this is a profession, I don't like using the word caregiving, but it's almost like it's natural. Women do it naturally, therefore it has no value. And I have a son who's going to be finishing his degree in engineering, and he has a friend also who's doing the same thing, and he was offered a job at Amazon for $95,000 coming right out of school. That doesn't happen when you do a 4-year degree in teaching. Why? Why doesn't that happen? And I really think it's because we're mostly women, unfortunately.
I had a student say the other day that teachers should be paid more than doctors because we're more important. And I'm like, well, if you're sick, maybe not. But, you know, but I mean, you know, granted, she wants to be a teacher, so I think there was some bias there. But, I mean, she actually sat there and listed off all the reasons why teachers should be paid way more than any other profession. And she even said, you know, we pay star athletes all this money. We should be paying that to teachers. And I'm like, oh, you pass.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Star male athletes.
Yeah, well, star male athletes, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. It's a good point.
But wasn't it in Iceland, and I don't know, but I think in Iceland at one point all the women walked off the job. And it didn't take long for people to realize that we cannot go forward in society without women doing what they do. You know,
totally.
So it's time to value all these professions: nurses, teachers, daycare workers. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, they're holding children in their hands, and yet they really aren't paid very well, and it's unfortunate. Yeah.
And you talked about what can we do to get people, women engaged and involved. Like you said, they're don't want to take on one more thing. And I think it's that support and really talking about, you know, prioritizing and looking at the long run, right? Because really, they're not just fighting for their, you know, the next 2 or 3 years. It's really their ability to remain in the profession, and why it's important to engage. And it doesn't have to be a huge time commitment, right? I think people are thinking, you know, you're going to have to commit a whole year or 5 years, and maybe it's to engage them to start off something small, where the commitment is, you know, coming to a meeting, getting involved and taking an event, so where they're connecting with like-minded, and then sometimes you feel that sort of passion and connection, and you want to take that next step. But it's just really, I think, being immersed into feeling valued again, and working with like-minded people to kind of get that juvenation, because right now people are tired and they're not feeling that, and they want to be inspired. They want hope. Listening to your council meeting today, you want advocacy. You want to know that people are fighting for your future and good public education, and when that happens, there's a spark and people want to get involved. But I would encourage them to start small, just to start small.
Well, just being here tonight, for example,
Yeah.
one of you in this room might go, you know what? I'm gonna get on a committee. Once a month, I can do it. I'm gonna get on. Like, that's all it takes. So my first women's symposium, I just was in awe. I went to, my mom lives in Winnipeg, and this is kind of sad. I went to my local union president and I said, is there any way you could sponsor me to go to the women's symposium in Winnipeg? I don't need a hotel. I just need somebody to pay for the registration. I have my mom. I can go there. No, I'm sorry, we don't do that. So I thought, you know what? I'm just doing it anyway. Paid for my registration and went. And it was the catalyst. And so that's all you need, is some little spark. And then you're like, huh. And also a little bit of anger.
Anger definitely helps.
A little bit of anger always helps.
Definitely helps, yeah. Can
And I
confirm.
heard a little bit of that anger today after the Minister of Education.
That was fantastic.
Subtle, very
So
subtle.
angry.
No, but it was a subtle,
Disappointed.
yes, and but you know that behind that it's like, oh, do you just want to?
See, now you've confused aggression with being assertive, right?
Part of the problem, Heidi. Part of the problem.
Yeah, but calling people out, like it's so important. And I think for me it was anger, like to see this wonderful profession and teachers not getting support in the classroom, teachers not being paid enough, teachers feeling like they have to do all this extra stuff when they don't. They used to come to me as a delegate and say, you know what, I've done Terry Fox Run for 5 years, I'm so tired. I'm like, you don't have to do it. It is not your role or responsibility. Let me look at page 121. Here it says, roles and responsibilities. Do you see Terry Fox in this? But it's important to say no sometimes, and to think about yourself, like life, life-work balance. You need to have that. Otherwise, you just don't make it.
Yeah, and not feeling guilty to take that balance. What do you mean you're leaving early? Yes, I have a life. I'm leaving early. Yes, right.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
important.
Yeah, for sure.
So you guys talked about inspiration. What does inspire you, other than the anger? Like what, what does inspire you?
For me, like, the best part of this job has been traveling around and talking to teachers, and it is the hope that teachers still have in their jobs and the passion that they bring to education every single day. Really helps me fight for education and fight to improve the quality of your lives in your classrooms and those students. But then also as a mother, it's my kids. Like my kids are in grade 1 and 3, and they have a lot of time in the public education system. And what is school gonna look like in 10 years for them? And it's scary to think, if we continue down this path of chronic underfunding, what is it going to look like? And whether it's me and my kids, or it is your niece and nephew, or your grandkids, or just the little people in front of you who deserve so much better, and who have been dealt a hard hand and could be incredible, just given a little bit more. And it's so frustrating seeing a minister of education responsible for all of these things come and list out numbers, which we know mean so little in the reality of all of these people in our lives. So I feel like I've gone down a path that
No, keep going. Keep
Going
going.
down the path. Keep going down the path.
that's what inspires me, is that we could do so much better. And we as teachers know that education is our hope for the future, and we need to fight for it, and we need to fight for the kids, and we need to fight for all of our futures. So seeing all of you and the passion that you have for your little ones, and maybe if you're in high school, I teach high school, so they're not so little because most of them are bigger
They're
than me.
still kids.
But yeah, but they get to that point, right? And that passion that we have for our students and their futures is really what brings me hope.
Yeah. I feel the same way. Talking to teachers is my favorite thing to do, because teachers, you know, you've all heard of flipping the system. You know, like it's a very top-down system, especially, I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but in Quebec, you know, the government makes decisions and then it comes down, and during the pandemic it was really tough because the directives changed almost on a weekly basis. Teachers didn't know if they were coming and going. And we need to flip that. We need to be listening to the people on the ground. They know. That doesn't sound good.
We need to flip the system.
I know I
We
said
need
I
to flip
wanted
the system.
flames,
Exactly.
but like, come on, people.
Exactly. And you know, when you talk to teachers, what do they want? They want their students in the classroom to succeed. And when there's no resources in the classroom, and they're sitting in front of a classroom where they have maybe 8 or 9 kids with needs that they can't provide, it is so depressing. And no wonder we end up on sick leave, because you can't even do your job anymore. So absolutely, talking to teachers for me is my inspiration.
I mean, the title of this fireside chat, you know, is leading from the heart. And when you do talk to teachers, that's what you're doing. It's from the heart. You're getting the mittens. You're getting the extra snacks. You're doing so much, right? And then you need help, right? Members say, hey, what, you know, I'm giving more than 100%, and no one really seems to care. And I think it's that desire to want to be able to have you do the things that you really want to do, and to be able to make that change when someone calls us and says, yeah, I got my prep payback, you know, so I didn't get that, or the supervision time, the contract, the language in that contract was honored because you were able to help, or the union negotiated that. There is a passion there. There's a good feeling there when you're able to kind of give back. And it's not just impacting one teacher, it's changing the lives of many teachers, but it's also changing the lives of the students you're working with, because you're so much a more relaxed person, right? You're so much better able to give back. And I think that's what we hear. I hear teachers say, I just want to do my job, Karen. I just want to do my job. Help me to do my job. And I want to do that, because that's where we came from. I've been in the classroom. My heart and soul as a special education teacher. I know what it's like when you just want to be able to, you know, work with your students and really meet their needs, and not having to worry about all this sort of latest assessment tool and all these other things that are happening, and you know, the new PD initiative that you have to take when it's the same one being recycled, and there's something about being able to change and able to advocate and be able to, you know, encounter the minister and say no, right? We want that, and I think that drives me, knowing that I'm able to help make changes where people aren't able to individually, but collectively, I'm able to lift your voice and elevate the voice of my members, and they're counting on that, and that's nice. That's a driving force.
Absolutely.
I love that those are your inspirations, that your colleagues and the teachers you're representing are your inspirations, right? Because I think that's probably why you're in the positions that you're in, right? Because I know for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to embarrass you now. It's the upcoming teachers, it's the new teachers, it's the interns, you know, and you see them and you see the passion they have and the excitement. I remember sitting at Convocation last June watching, and I was talking to the person sitting next to me going, oh, those poor B.Ed graduates, because there's like 400 of them walking across the stage, and I'm thinking, there's no jobs for you. And if you do get a job, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into, but you still want to be a teacher. But you know,
There are jobs.
yes.
Kirsten.
There are jobs.
Yes, I talked to her. Yeah.
All right.
But you know, like just seeing the excitement and the passion and listening to them, and they're all like, "Oh, they're so excited to get out there," and that's fantastic. And I'm glad we still have people coming up or hearing I teach high school, so hearing my students talk about how they want to be a teacher, and I'm like, "Oh, this is awesome, right?" Like we still have people
It's an
wanting to do this,
amazing
even though it's so
profession.
difficult.
Such an amazing
Right?
profession. I never thought I'd be a teacher. My mother always said I should be. I'm like, Mom, bug off. And I did 2 degrees, and I had a degree in science, worked in a lab, I hated it, degree in fine arts, and then I was like, okay, what can I do? And at the time, in the 90s, they had this 1-year program, so I thought, oh, what the heck, you know, my mother was right. I walked into the classroom, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I always wonder if I have more influence inside the classroom than I do in the position that I am in. And another thing that I was talking to Bobby about was that after my 2 years as president of Canadian Teachers Federation, my plan is to go back into the classroom. Because I really think that you guys have a tremendous power inside the classroom. You can change the minds, the young molded minds, you know, you can mold minds. We're fighting with governments that are really more difficult to deal with and that probably won't change their mind. Whereas teachers, they can mold the minds of their students.
I find your story so funny because you told my story. You did. Like I was like, I'm not being a teacher. No. Too many people in my family are teachers. I'm not being a teacher. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Got a political science degree, got a philosophy degree, and then went, well, I can't do anything with this. What am I going to do? I like kids. I'll be a teacher. Yeah. And it's just
the
like
same
it did. I fell into it. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Right.
Same.
Yeah.
My story too. Well, I didn't get through the degree. I got through the first year, and I was like, God, working in a lab sucks. Like I was starting in medical research, and I'm like, microbiology. Who would want to do this? It stinks. You have to go and make sure your bacteria is growing. And then I ended up in middle school, and it's all
where there's
kind of
all
the
only
same.
bacteria.
Could be the same thing.
The smell is bad. There's lots of bacteria. Like it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Karen, did you always want to be a teacher?
Oh, yes. And it started in high school. We're the high school teachers. I did co-op. Thank God for co-op, right? I did co-op, and I got that experience, and I loved working with kids. I worked in a daycare and said, no, I'd never would do that. Because there was a different level of respect. I noticed that right away and said, no, I loved teaching. And right out of high school, I channeled the path towards teaching, and it's been the most rewarding, and it's rewarding when you meet those students and you're in the drive-through at McDonald's and they're like, Miss So-and-so, you taught me when whatever grade, and your tears come back, right? And they remember you, and you've had an impact. And I think that's the thing. Like you might think you don't, but there's always one. There's always one student that'll come back. I'll send you an email. They'll send you an email. You're running to them there.
So imagine how many haven't come back,
exactly.
right? Because you like you said, you'll get an email or a letter from a student, but imagine all those who are thinking about you that just haven't written the email.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of teaching. You do make an impact.
Yeah.
Someone's appreciating. They might not tell you right away that you shared your lunch with them, or you call their parent to convey that they're sitting in the corner by themselves. They don't have any friends. Maybe we can that. I think is also very impactful. That it's such a profession where you get that love back in a very different way, right? It's a very different way, and so I loved being in the classroom. Probably won't be back in the classroom. I'm closer to retiring, so yes, I'm closer to that end. But I did go in and out while I was doing my leadership journey, and those were some of my best years. Such impactful years. So treasure them, right? It's just it's beautiful.
Well, I actually wanted to be a zookeeper.
No,
But I think it's just because I wanted a pet. But but I was determined I was going to be a zookeeper. And like the day that I came up here, my students decided that they are going to make monkey sounds in the hallways. So I'm not that far off, apparently.
It's pretty close.
Yeah. Some days it feels like it, right? So, okay. So we talk about new teachers coming up, or the members who are there maybe looking and thinking, maybe not. So what advice could you give to a new teacher or somebody who's just considering entering this world that we're part of? What advice would you give them?
It gets better. It does. I think you're coming in. I just remember being a new teacher. You come in with all this energy, and you wanna do everything, and you want to be involved in everything, and you can. I think. New teacher, learn to say no and survive your first 2 years in your probation period. I always used to say, you get through that, and that there are periods in your life, and that's okay. There's going to be times when you can give a lot, and then there's going to be different seasons in your career. And I think, I don't know here in Saskatchewan, but at least in Ontario, the demographics is changing. We're having a lot of teachers leave within the first 5 years because it's so challenging, right?
Yep.
And they're coming in highly skilled, can do a variety of other things, and it's hopefully that you're coming in with a passion for teaching, because if you don't have that passion, it's going to be very hard to survive. So if you're coming in for the pension and the other things that you're not going to last. So it is a time to really, I'd say to new teachers, really evaluate if this is the career you want to be in, and if not, use those skills. And for those of you who this is where you want to be and you're seeing those barriers and things, connect with those veteran teachers, and it does get better. It does get better, and you can be involved in helping to make that better. But depending on where you are in your career, but the first few years, connect and get a good foundation. I think it's important. I think new teachers tend to want to do a lot of things and burn out really, really fast. So it's okay to do one or two things. That's usually what I'd say to them, and that it does get better.
Well, I wish I could tell my younger self when I started, that it's not all your fault. The system is not geared. Unfortunately, there's less and less investment in education, and therefore your classes are getting more and more difficult. And I don't want to discourage, but I just want you to think to yourself, do the best that you can, but don't blame everything on yourself. It is not all your fault. The system is part of the problem. And that's why we're in the positions that we're in. We're trying to fix that system for you. But I think that we do a lot of self-blaming. Like when we don't have students that succeed, it must be my fault. I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? And we got to stop doing that. And it's about having joy every day. Find some joy in your day every day. Laugh. You got to laugh with your students. I laugh sometimes. Oh my God, I've laughed so hard with my students. I can think of some things now that are making me laugh. But I blame myself. I remember those first 2 weeks. It was a really difficult. I was the third teacher that had come in to replace a teacher. So they all, slowly left. And I was the last one, and I would go home every night crying. For 2 weeks, I went home in my car crying, and I already had 2 degrees. I was in my mid-20s. Like I wasn't super. Like I was like 26, 27. I wasn't really young, and I had to kind of, Heidi, it's not your fault. You are a good teacher, but you're in a really bad situation. And so once I figured that out, then I calmed down. It's amazing how when you calm down, the students calm down with you. And I was able to get through that year, and I went back in the following fall. And there's ups and downs for sure, but I would say just don't blame yourself. There's more to it than just you in the classroom. There's not enough supports for you. too many students with special needs. There's too many students with individual plans, or whatever you want to call them. So you can only do as much as the system will provide you, and have joy. Yeah.
I would echo both of those. So I'm trying to think of something that hasn't been said. But I also think that we talk about this collectivity and our strength as a collective, and I think that's true as well in our schools, right? You're not alone in your school as a teacher, whether you're a new teacher or not. Ask for help when you need help, and I don't. There's always this shame and feeling like you can't do it sometimes, or maybe not always, but for me, there's always, anytime I can't do something, I feel shame about it. But like, don't. And I don't know why I do, but ask for help when you need help. And if you feel like you need something, ask for it. And if someone says no, or that they can't get that for you, ask someone else. And like, go, right? Like when I said, I feel like I'm struggling. Maybe I just told the wrong person that I felt like I was struggling and I needed to move on to someone else. But we're all here. We all want everyone to be successful in this because it means that our kids are successful in this. So ask for help and reach out.
Yeah, because it could be really isolating anyway if you're in your classroom with your students, and it can be very isolating. It's very easy to kind of close the door and suffer through something. But yeah, I love the profession. So, and I find it really sad that there's not, like in Quebec, we have a huge shortage. It's really bad in Quebec, the shortage we have. And unfortunately, there's not a bunch of people lining up at university to become teachers. And I just find that really sad because it's such an amazing profession. But we need to improve the working conditions. We need to improve the salary. We need to improve class composition. If we can improve all that, then we will pull people back into the profession.
And you know, that goes back to the work that we do, and you know, we're in bargaining, and that's part of the conversation when they talk about teacher absenteeism. We're like, well, you know, hold on here, right? You know, so why are teachers taking all these sick days? Why is there such an enormous amount of that occurring? And it goes back to us advocating for the working conditions. Why are you having a hard time getting occasional teachers to come in? Because the respect and the conditions are not there. And so, you know, in our roles, it comes full circle in regards to wanting it to be better for you younger teachers, newer teachers, and say young because, you know, more to those coming into the profession, because we're seeing, and it's not just unique to Ontario, Quebec, we're seeing that across Canada, where the conditions are really keeping people from entering a field that is and wonderful, and those who are in it from staying in there. And, you know, those of us who are just trying to survive through the end, and it shouldn't be like that. You should be thriving through what you're doing. And it's as Heidi said, it's the system, and these are things, you know, as we're bargaining, you know, trying to sit in Ontario really to change our sick leave provisions, because, you know, too many people are utilizing it. Well, why? And so it's really, and so why is that, as opposed to trying to address attendance management? Let's get to the root causes. And so, you know, there's a passion in me when I share those stories and I talk about, whoa, stop blaming our members here, right? How about you look at yourself and what are you doing to support our members so that they are able to be in school and able to do what we all want, right? We want kids to succeed. They want it as much, but based on the conditions, they're not able to.
So I think, like, you guys have mentioned, you know, like we were all in that point when we were, you know, starting out and just barely holding on, and then maybe decided, okay, maybe I'll get involved in this, right? But I mean, now I'm sure that we could probably all agree our leadership styles are probably different from what they were when we started. So I'm really interested to find out if there was a specific turning point for you. Is there a specific defining moment? Like for me, as an example, I was sitting at a bargaining table and my superintendent was sitting across from me and rolled his eyes at me. And I'm like, hold on a second. Can you maybe be professional and follow the norms of the meeting and not roll your eyes at me? And I thought, you know, I was professional. I did this really well. 2 months later, I got transferred from my school because there was an opening. Somebody had to be transferred, and he made it sure that it was me. And that, his hope,
Anger.
it would quiet me. Everybody who knows me knows that's not going to quiet me. That's going to wake the beast. And that's exactly when it happened. So he's responsible for all of it. I blame him. But yeah, so like that was my defining moment. That's what turned me into kind of where I am today. And I mean, then you just keep growing from that. But that was the point where I'm like, no, nobody's doing this to me again. Nobody's doing this to other teachers again. I'm not going to have it. So do you guys have a defining moment? Is there something that you can pinpoint? Makes you think, yeah, that's what turned me onto the path of where I am today.
Well, I went back to university, like I said, as soon as my oldest became 12. Poor him, he's got so much responsibility since he was 12. I went back to university to get a master's degree in art education. And the reason I went back was because as an art teacher, I was doing no art whatsoever. I had no time. So I decided this is a great way to do art. I'll take art education. And what ended up happening is I became more of an activist and learned more about the philosophy of education than I actually did art. I did art too. I was able to do a production of art. But there's a philosopher named Michael Apple who I really liked. He's from New York, and he taught really tough groups of kids. And he writes books about, his philosophy in education. Him and his wife, they both are teachers. And he was invited to India, a province in India, to come and see what they do there. And I guess the director general of that province, or whatever they were called, said, you should come and see. All the students have devices in our schools. So they went out and they went to India, him and his wife, and they visited the schools. And yes, all the kids had devices, but there were no bathrooms. So girls did not go to school because if they had to go to the bathroom, it was very difficult for them. So this idea of having technology was really big, but if you don't have the infrastructure, that to me is more important. So it was a time when I was on this, I was a teacher and I wasn't part of the union, I was a delegate, and I was at a table talking about education policies, and they were bringing in Google. And I said that story at the table. I said, it's all wonderful to have, technology, and I told the story about India, but if you don't even have a bathroom that works, because I'm not kidding, our infrastructure in Quebec is really, really bad, then what's the sense of it? And the room became silent. That's when I realized that I have power in knowledge, and that I can say something and have that quiet listening and realization. That's when I noticed that I could be a voice for teachers in the classroom. So that was, for me, a big turning point after I told that story about India.
Well, I have a similar turning point, and it was more surrounded around pizza and late nights. But it was
Hey, pizza's good.
And it was our local bargaining, and we were I was on the negotiating team, so it was the first time I was part of that team, and I learned about strategy and how to get on that team about plumbing from some of my friends who I had no idea what that meant, and how to actually, and that was strategic, because it was strategic to get me on as part of this team. So I learned some things. I said I was so naive at the time, but we were meeting with a mediator, a local mediator, Kevin Becotte, and it was very late at night, and I remember him saying, you guys have way too many items on the table. You need to pick your top 10. What are your top 10 things? And we had to work on the language that we were going to present to the board. And I had the opportunity to work on language for teachers in their ability to have a meeting with the principal to talk about selecting their teaching assignment. So they had to meet, and there had to be an opportunity for them to select their top 3. And so it wasn't just you were just given. You had to have this meeting, and there's a whole process. And that language got into our collective agreement. It was the first collective agreement. It was pizza orange, because it was late at night. The only thing we could get was pizza. And that was, for me, a defining moment. Here was a document, and that was one of the clauses I had to, that was the first clause. And you learn to write others, but that was sort of, Karen, you were going to take this particular clause and to work on it. I'm like, oh my goodness. But that was from hearing from what teachers wanted and what they needed when it came to their assignments and getting their assignments. And then to see that in that document, cool. Like you said, talk about voice and power, and my name was there, and we were able to get this for members. And could we get so much more? Yeah. And that was the beginning of continuing to be on bargaining teams from a local to like a provincial level. Cool. So yeah, that was a defining moment for me. Yeah.
I really don't know if I have a turning point. Like, I saw the question on the sheet, and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I've gone through. Well, no, we got the questions. So we got the questions.
Yes. Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
No one remembers them.
We
don't remember them though.
Right.
We didn't look at them.
You didn't prepare.
Well,
Sam was studying and like.
I was.
I feel like I was going through therapy trying to figure out what the turning point was for me, because like, I don't know what it was. I'm like, okay, well that happened. And I'm like, well that didn't really change who I was, but I've always been really stubborn, and I don't know, my earliest memory, and maybe it's just a childhood story, Chris is laughing at me. Already, I haven't even gotten into it. My earliest maybe memory or story that I've been told of, I have an older brother who's very close in age. We're just over a year apart, and he played hockey, as he should, boy. And I was in dance, which I was told I also wanted to play hockey. I didn't know this because I was 3, and but I said I wanted to play hockey, and I was told, no, you can't play hockey because you're a boy. So maybe that's my turning point, this like 3-year-old where I'm like, you're gonna tell me I can't do something.
Right.
I'm gonna do it. So it didn't take me, it took me till university before I played hockey, but I played hockey.
There you go.
But I tell Bobby about my dad all the time, and so I have a Lebanese father, and he likes to tell me things that I can't do. I feel like he's joking, but sometimes I don't know. But this is the childhood therapy that we're talking about. And so I am so stubborn that if he tells me to not do something, I'm doing it, regardless of what it is or whether I want to or not. And he will tell me just never change. That was always his response to me anytime I was like being really stubborn. He's like, Samantha, never change. I feel bad for your future husband.
I'm pretty sure my mom weaponized that against me because I too am stubborn. I know that's a shock to people. But, you know, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, watch me. Like, I'm pretty sure she learned how to weaponize that to make me do what she wanted. You cannot do these dishes. Oh, I'm going to do the dishes. I caught on early, though.
So maybe it was just this like lifetime of people telling me I couldn't do things that I just...
I think your moment was today in front of Duncan, personally.
I agree.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
That was great.
So like we could sit up here and just keep talking all night, but I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions or some questions. So if you would like to ask these wonderful ladies a question, just pop up your hand and she'll come around with the mic.
And that's a good moment for us just to pause, because I got so excited to turn it over to the panel. I forgot to introduce Bobby Taillefer, who's our executive director. Well, the panelists keep talking about Bobby, and I know might not know who you are, so I just wanted to introduce. While I'm at it, Ian Cripps, our associate executive director. And Angela Banda is another associate executive director behind the pillar. So you've seen our people here with these big cameras, and they would like to take some pictures of the group as well. But if you are not interested in having your photo taken, just let them know that, and they won't do that.
Yeah, I don't want my photo taken.
It's too late. So I would like to give you an opportunity to ask some questions if you have, and just let me know, and I'll pass the mic on over.
Earlier you spoke about how you had lots of women shoulder tap you and urge you into those leadership positions, and my question is, did you have men do the same thing for you?
Good question.
Yeah, I'll start. I did, both at the local and provincial level, running some of my campaigns, just encouraging me and making space, saying, you know, making those connections with people that maybe I wouldn't have been able to make connections with, some of the men that they knew and who maybe were, you know, I might have been prejudging them maybe in regards to maybe being part of the old boys club, but who were open and saw that we needed shifting. So different people have different circles of influence, and it's key to know that and to listen. I learned to listen to whether there was the men or the women, but you're talking about the men, what sort of things that they were looking for in regards to a leader in general, and in some of the things that they saw in me as a good leader in regards to my ability to listen, my openness, and that was something that they valued. And so I said there were connections that I wouldn't have been able to make, but I had connections with some men who were able to speak to other men to I don't know if you say vouch for me, but you know what I mean, who could sort of say, yeah, I've seen Karen in action, because we have different circles. So some people have that opportunity to see me at a leadership table, an executive table, where you might not as a local leader. It's very different how I might respond and how I'm able to maybe think quickly on my feet, or the long-term planning. Some things you would only get a synopsis of that. And I was able to, I think, what's the word? Not utilize, but I valued those relationships, and I used them. And as I say capitalize, I don't want to use it in a negative, but they were valuable relationships as well in regards to that. Not every, but yes, I did have some gentlemen who supported my journey and my push for presidency. And part of that was kind of them also not taking that step, taking a step back and saying, maybe in a few years, or no, Karen, no, I don't need to challenge you or whatever. I want to work with you, and the timing. So that has been my experience. It's been positive, and yes, there are a few who aren't, but definitely we talked about allies, and I think it's important. And we were talking about earlier in regards to men supporting, but not that because it's a male voice, it's valued, or that's the voice you sort of nod your head to, because it was, you know, it's a mixture. Like I said, validating, but I don't need to be validated. I need to be supported. So it's that sort of fine balance, and you'll know that. You'll know those men who are generally want to, you know, they're men who are here. And I think that's the start. They value women in leadership and want to be supportive. They have daughters, right? They have, you know, nieces, people who identify as women who they want to be able to see in those leadership roles, and they want to stand in and want to be part of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My executive director, Sébastien Joly, I have a lot of respect for him, and he always encourages me. We make a really good team together. I'm the president, he's the executive director, and he can count on me, and I can count on him. So absolutely, and like she said, we need those allies too. You know, it's important.
Yeah, definitely in my time on the executive, there have been a number of my male colleagues who have been very supportive and encouraging, and helping get me along in my decision-making process. Yeah, I was going to say something else, and now I can't remember. So, yeah, there were.
That's excellent.
Other questions from the audience? Oh, boy. I'm just going to, maybe I'll start on this side of the room, and we'll... Oh, I see. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, what advice, this is for you, Karen, what advice do you have for racialized teachers who identify as women who are not or are reluctant to move up or go for principalships because of the systemic racism, and maybe being the only racialized teacher in their district or school division or area?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you're thinking about it means you're qualified, right? It means you have the skill set. You feel there's something within yourself, and I would say go for it. It's not going to be easy, but other people are also counting on you, and you tend. It's opening the door for someone else, right? And I think it was Bobby who sent me this lovely book, and that we rise by lifting others, right? And so. Hopefully some of your colleagues who don't look like you will help you, or will lift you, right, and will support you if you're the only one. I would also encourage you and others outside of teaching who are professionals who are in racialized groups. I'm part of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. So I have people who are from the Carpenters Association, who are from CUPE, who are other unions, who are racialized members, who are going through leadership. And so we shared some stories, and we shared some the skill sets and the things that you need to have those courageous conversations. Who are your allies in your school that you're saying, hey, I'm interested in leadership. I think I have the skills. I want to be a VP, right? You say you're an ally. I need you to support me. Introduce me to some people. Give me some opportunities. And you got to be that blunt, right? You really do. And then just say, hey, and you'll know who really wants to, and maybe you have someone who doesn't, and you challenge them, and then you move on to someone who will. And I think it's to say, and that your school board needs you, and the kids that you're going to be working with need you. They need to see diverse leadership. They need to see strong racialized women leading. Racialized kids need to see that. White kids need to see that. Non-racialized, everybody needs to see that everybody can be a principal, can lead, right? And I'm not saying that you have to be the superintendent, but you can start, and you can pull someone else up and tap them along the line. And the fact that you're doing that, another person will say, hey, you're a principal, I can do that as well. And I know that was a big factor in my local and the diversity that we had in our local. At one point in time, we had 5 racialized individuals on an executive of 14. And I think the numbers increased. And this, just because people felt that they could get involved. And I think that's the start. And also you have non-racialized people who are saying, hey, yeah, we need to tap other people. Everyone doesn't look like us. We know other people, right? And to be deliberate in that, for those people who are not racialized, be deliberate. I don't know, what school are you from, young lady?
Oh no, let me do this.
Oh, okay, she's staff? She's a staff? Yes?
May I introduce you to Helen Van Gool, who is a senior administrative staff.
Okay.
One of my first hires.
Oh, there you go. You have to be deliberate. So there you go. Bobby knows that. You got to be deliberate. And so for those who are in the room, I would have a conversation and say, I'm interested. And who do you know that's gone through the process, or someone that you admire, and they're teachers on your staff who can help you develop that portfolio, that skills that you need to move within that area. I think a lot of people are willing. They just people don't approach them. And I think a lot more people want to help others rise. So I think just ask and connect. And you know who you can go to and you can't go to. Okay, Helen.
Well, I have the microphone now. I was wondering if we could extend the discussion on men in leadership positions being seen as powerful and women in leadership positions being seen as aggressive. And I know that the title of tonight's session is Leading from the Heart, but feelings of frustration for women in those leadership positions and the anger that sometimes brings to the surface as well. How do you deal with those feelings when we're treated differently than the men in those positions, when we have the same qualifications or more qualifications than the men in those positions that we're leading with, whether it's in the classroom or a local association or other positions?
Well, I remember the first time that I got kind of yelled at by my counterparts across the table. I was complaining.
No, complaining?
I was complaining
Oh, okay. That's okay.
about class size. I was saying that we had way too many oversized classes in the school board, and the assistant director general pounded his fist on the table and said, Heidi, I don't know what you're talking about. The ratio is 1 to 17. Oh, right. So somebody had a good class. Somebody had a good class. And afterwards, I was talking to my colleagues, my professional staff, and one of them said to me, Heidi, it's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. We've had a male president for 8 years, and not once have anybody pounded their fist on the table at him. I don't know, I've never seen anything like this. And as I said earlier, when I started off very strong. I went in kind of a bit like a bulldog, and that was not getting me anywhere because of the perception that my bulldog action was making me aggressive. So I was also getting that from them, though. I had Assistant Director of Human Resources hang up on me once because he didn't like the answer I gave him. So I was getting that kind of feedback. But as I said previously, I started to change the way I was reacting to them. And this is my style, and I'm not suggesting we all should do this. But I started to be more motherly. And it actually worked for me. It really did. I started, like I said, talking to the assistant DHR about their kids and what they're up to, and always started with a bit of and maybe we do that, and maybe even men do that, I don't know, but instead of going in strong, right away to the topic, I changed the way, I became a little softer. And there's actually an article, and I forget, and we were talking about it at the last Women's Symposium. Anybody who was there in Halifax, there was a session about it, and it was that judo. It's that fine balance that you have to find between being too soft or too hard, and that I think is something that we, as women, and I am talking about myself, I'm talking personally, have to struggle with a little bit. So for me, and that's just personally, that I felt that if I softened my tone and I was more motherly with my male counterparts, I could get somewhere. Which I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? But that was me personally, and so maybe you guys have a different take.
Yeah. See, I had a very soft tone, and that was seen as weakness, right? It was and so I had people actually yelling out at me, and it was the same thing. I didn't see anyone yell out at a president in the last 10 years at a meeting, right? And it was, so I actually had to sort of revert to a style maybe that they could relate to. I had to say, stop that. I don't appreciate that tone. Don't do that again. And because it was sort of, okay, I'm just listening, okay, ignoring that, and it was seen as a sign of weakness. And so it's that fine fine balance. And then it was sort of, oh, I was yelling. I'm thinking, you started it. And so it is that fine balance and how people perceive that. And I think it's depending on the styles and of engagement, and your tone and your in fluctuation. Even my letters, there were some issues where I was very vocal. We were a very equity-seeking organization, and when the whole convoy thing was going on in Ottawa, and our local there wanted some support, and we put out, I thought was relatively tame language, nothing out of the ordinary that ETFO would put out in regards to some of the racism, anti-Semitism that we were seeing there. And there was people were calling me and threatening to report me to the College of Teachers, and I'm thinking, and demanding my college number. And I'm thinking, I don't think anyone ever called and made these demands of a former president. No one's heard that. But it was just, there was a very different response to the firmness and to the no. It's no, I'm not changing my mind. No. And I actually had to say that. Sometimes the answer is no.
But when you say no, you're being stubborn.
Oh, I'm being
and
stubborn.
not listening.
No, and I actually need to change my mind because you have a different opinion as opposed to someone would have said no in the past, and it was no, and they sat down, and so there was that persistence. So it really is sort of you, like you said. I'm stubborn. I'm not flexible. I'm not listening. Right? I'm thinking, no, I'm listening. I'm being flexible, but I'm being firm. And I'm leading, and this is the direction, and I'm not being, wishy-washy, right? And so it's that whole sort of, like you said, it's very interesting, and I have experienced that in regards to how that was perceived for me, but yet seeing others in very similar situations, and that sort of that strength and that sense of direction was seen as a good thing, as opposed to I should be lost and confused and fluttered. Well, I'm not, right? Because that you're trying to do it, I'm not, and so you're being difficult. No, decision has been made.
I think that women also perceive women that are strong as.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to stop and think a little bit better next time we see a woman that's strong, that's trying to be tell it the way it is, that we don't look at that and go, oh, she just thinks she knows it. Like, like, oh, there she goes again, or whatever. We do that to ourselves. It's really bad. We do judge other women. So I think not only the men, but the women too. So we need to support each other and not look at women that are strong and think, oh, well, they're just, I won't say the bad word.
And there's an automatic assumption that women are emotional about something.
Oh, yes.
Right? Sitting at the bargaining table and a man says something and they're like, oh, yeah. And then I use the exact same tone and I'm told, sweetie, you need to calm down. Oh, hold on, you called me sweetie? Excuse me? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right? And then I am emotional and I am angry because now you've crossed a line, right? But a man can say the exact same thing in the exact same tone and it's like, yeah, you're right. Oh, yeah, we got that.
Biases.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is advice I would probably need to take myself, but it's easier for myself to take it. So I think that we just need to be confident in our own leadership styles as well, whether it is that soft tone or mothering tone, or whether it is a hard or harder tone that you're taking with the people that you're working with. If you're being successful and the other side of the table that you're working with has an issue with the tone that you're taking with them, well, that's their issue that they need to deal with themselves. So if they're saying that you're being stubborn, or that you're being aggressive, or that you're being weak, that's their issue that they have to deal with in their perception of you. And it's hard to hear those things from the other side, but a lot of the times those things come from insecurity on the other side, that they don't know how to deal with you so that they can be successful in that negotiation as well. So
There was this woman in Montreal. She was in the city council, and she decided to. I don't know if you've all heard about this, but she would knit red when men spoke and knit green when women spoke. Guess what color the scarf was? It was like mostly red, and I don't know what that's about. If just men like they say the same. We have a tendency to kind of maybe like, here's what it is, tick, 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 whereas men elaborate and go on and but it's really interesting that.
I'm going to bring my crocheting
I
down
love
tomorrow
that
now.
idea too. Isn't that great?
We actually.
at our executive table, I'm not saying when, so I've been on the executive table since 2015. It's sometime, not knitted, but I don't know how to knit, but I kept track of how many times men spoke versus how many times women spoke, and for the length of time. And there was one day where in the entire day we had like 4.5 hours of men speaking and 30 minutes of women speaking. And like it was a significant difference.
That's funny.
At that table.
Because I've done it at pension and benefits as well and found something very similar. So
very interesting.
And we keep track of those records at our annual meeting. So we actually keep track of who is speaking at the microphone, who is actually taking up space, and women do not speak as much as men. So we actually track and we report because the data doesn't lie. It doesn't lie.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get back to our leadership styles and being comfortable in your leadership styles and really having good people to support you. Because I have a good team, because sometimes I get very passionate and my voice goes up and I move and I have people who are looking at me and who are coughing and who are giving me hints and feedback. And so there are people who really want to help you develop as a leader, and they're trying to help me develop as a leader, right? To kind of self-regulate sometimes. And that's important, and I appreciate that. It's that critical feedback to help me be better, right? And I remember our last meeting, and one of my colleagues says, Karen, did you see me coughing? Did you hear me coughing? I'm like, no, I was well beyond that point. Like, I was just well beyond, I was just lacing in. I'm like, I didn't even hear you cough. And there's little cues, because I know I can just, I get off script. And we know there's sometimes, Karen, do not, oh, she's off script. Oh, no, she's off script. And then there's times, yes, she's off script. Yes, it's great. And I appreciate that. I do have people who are like, okay, Karen, this is really important, and we need you to taper the passion here, or we need it here, and that it is, because sometimes sometimes your emotions do, because you really are passionate about it, and I appreciate that at times when I know there are people who want me to succeed, and they want the organization to succeed. And we all have strengths and weaknesses and things that we work together to make that happen. So I do have some, sometimes some secret people giving me little nods and things. And if you ever come to an ETFO meeting and someone's going like, that means Karen, you need to slow down a bit. So it's hard.
I think the word emotional has been weaponized against women too. Because what's wrong with being emotional? Yeah. Like, what's wrong with having passion for what you're doing and putting some emotion into it? But at the same time, people are, oh, you're too emotional. Well, isn't that a good thing? If you're emotional and you're dedicated and you're passionate, I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
So we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I know, it's 9 o'clock.
Sure no.
It's been really neat to see how we've been ebbing and flowing through the main themes the entire time. And you actually touched upon this during the last question near the end there. My question was that sometimes women create barriers for other women. And oftentimes they say, well, they want a man leading them because they don't want that competition with another woman. They just feel like it's easier to have somebody different than them. So I was gonna ask, have you experienced that where women kind of set up their own barriers for you as other women, and how have you gotten past that?
Well, I've actually never felt that with any of the women that I've worked with. I hope I don't do that to other women. That's really important for me to continue to encourage other women to come, to rise them up. And but no, I maybe it's just luck, I don't know, or the people that I've been around, but I haven't noticed that. But I know it happens, because maybe one of you have had that, but it's never happened to me personally where a woman has kind of pushed me. I've had to convince women, for example, CTF put in designated seats for women at the table at the executive, which was really exciting. But I'd had to convince women to actually agree to that. I find that interesting, because they think that, well, I don't need a designated seat, I'm strong enough, leave me alone. But there are some people out there that do need the designated seat, so let us have them, and that kind of stuff. So I've had to work on women that way, and the way I did it was I brought them to the women's symposium. You just bring them to the women's symposium, and
that'll do it every time.
That'll do it every time. But I don't know if you guys have had the same experience.
Maybe I'll go next. I think sometimes women don't understand. Sometimes they don't realize what they're doing, because I actually had this experience not too long ago, and like I said, we've had a male president for a very, very long time before I took office. Male president, a white male president, and we have these women's programs, which I'm a product of. We had a program called Women in Action, and it's women getting involved in the Federation. Before we became one union, actually, we were kind of tapped. We got together at a hotel and they said, hey, they want women to be part of this new organization and to lead and to be actively involved. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll come to this meeting, right? You go to the meeting and you want to get involved. And so there was all sorts of training through different periods of time, through your engagement with the Federation. And I went through all that. So I'm a product of women's leadership, of the supports in the program. And we had a change in a particular a budget, and some things happened with that. And that happened on the floor of our meeting. And then there was a narrative, oh, this executive doesn't care about women's programs. And I'm thinking, okay, you got a woman and a black woman leading. All of a sudden, we don't care about women's programs. And so you sort of, you step back and it's like, okay, what is happening here in regards to women? And to step back to say, here you have a woman that's leading. Have we forgotten that journey? And so it was that conversation to sort of, let's step back. Is that really what's happening here? And sometimes people are disappointed, and so it became an issue, but that wasn't really the issue. And it was developing a roadblock in regards to not recognizing the commitment to women's programs. And these were other women who were like, how could you not see that? But they were caught up in an issue, but not the bigger perspective. And it was creating, I felt, a barrier. I was disappointed. And so it was having those conversations. And I really did. I said, hey, I am a testimony of what women's programs can do. Mm-hmm. So let's have this conversation, because it's really disheartening that you would think that someone who is a product of that would try to dismantle that. Mm. And so there was an example of women not really, there's a wonderful quote by Sojourner Truth that says, ain't I a woman? And I felt it at that time, like, ain't I a woman? Right? Mm-hmm. And it was so, and we had that very powerful conversation, and it's being addressed. So it does occur, but it was very subtle, and it was really women not stepping back to look at the bigger picture. It was a women's issue, but not looking at me as a woman, right? It was just women's issues, but, well, I am a woman, and I am part of that issue. Mm-hmm. So it was almost a detaching of it, and I thought, okay, this doesn't make any sense. So that was from my experience. It does happen, and really it's having those. For me, it was having a conversation with some of those women leaders, and a part of that courageous conversation to make that shift. And we were able to move past it and look at solutions, as opposed to starting to create a narrative that wasn't true, but a narrative about women's issues, but not looking at the women it's actually impacting, right? And I think that's part of it. Women, like, these are other women who are trying to lead. How, whatever you're saying or doing, how are you actually impacting them? Not just the movement, there's the movement, but how about the women in the movement and women who've come up through the movement? So I wanted to share that story. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a woman tell me that I can't do it, and that I don't have the skills, and that I'm not capable.
Wow.
But it was me.
Oh.
We do it to ourselves all the time. And it's easy to ignore, right? Like, and you said you don't remember anyone doing it to you. And I honestly don't remember anyone other than myself as a woman telling me that I can't do this. Mm-hmm. But I'm also really good at, like, okay, that's nice. When other people say things, but it's hard to ignore that voice inside your head.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I would like to thank Heidi and Karen and Sam and Peggy for just being so open and, really vulnerable and sharing some really personal stories. And I think that just very empowering and moving to hear what you've experienced and some of the advice that you'd give people in the audience, and also whether it's far into your career are new. I think that, we've got some interns in the crowd, and I think that's just so great that they get to hear early on some of the things that many of us don't think about or hear about till later on. So thank you so much. I'd like to just thank our panel tonight.